The stars looked cold and empty as Commander Jake Morrison stared out the viewport of his ship. The war had been going on for 30 years now, and humanity was losing badly. Every day brought news of another colony destroyed, another fleet wiped, out by the alien enemies who called themselves the Zephyrian Empire. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and turned back to the bridge of the TDS Endeavor. His crew worked quietly at their stations, but he could see the fear in their faces. Everyone knew what was coming. The final battle was only days away, and they were not ready for it. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes looked up from her computer screen. Her young face was pale, and her hands shook slightly as she held a datapad. "Commander, you need to see this," she said in a quiet voice. Jake walked over to her station and took the pad. The numbers on the screen made his stomach drop. Intelligence reports showed a massive alien fleet heading straight for Earth. 10,000 ships, maybe more. It was bigger than anything humanity had ever faced before. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. 3 days, maybe 4 if we're lucky," Lisa replied. "War Marshal Kethvar is leading them personally. He's calling it the final cleansing." Jake looked around his bridge. The Endeavor was one of only 50 human ships left in the entire fleet. Against 10,000 enemy vessels, they might as well be throwing rocks at a mountain. The doors to the bridge opened, and Admiral Pete Sullivan walked in. The old man moved slowly, his gray hair thin and his face marked by years of war. Pete had been fighting aliens since before Jake was born, and he had seen humanity's greatest victories and worst defeats. "Bad news travels fast," Pete said, nodding toward the datapad in Jake's hands. "We need options, Admiral," Jake said. 50 ships against 10,000. There has to be something we can do." Pete was quiet for a long moment. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the distant stars. "You know, Jake, when I was a young officer like you, we used to tell stories about the old days. Stories about ships that could do impossible things." Lisa looked confused. "What kind of stories?" "Sir?" "Ghost stories mostly," Pete said with a small smile. "Tales that spacers would tell in bars when they'd had too much to drink. Stories about ships that vanished into the dark and were never seen again." Jake felt a flash of anger. "Admiral, we don't have time for fairy tales. We need real solutions." But Pete continued as if he hadn't heard. "There was one story in particular, about a ship called the USS Phantom. This was back during the First Contact Wars about 200 years ago. The Phantom was supposed to be different from other ships, special somehow." "Special how?" Lisa asked, despite herself. "Nobody really knew," Pete said. "The story said it had technology that didn't make sense, weapons that could destroy entire fleets, armor that could stop any attack. But one day, during a big battle, the Phantom just disappeared, vanished into space with all 800 crew members. Never came back." Jake shook his head. "That's just an old story, Admiral. We need real help, not myths." "Maybe," Pete said. "But I've been in this war for 40 years, and I've learned that sometimes the impossible is the only thing left to try." Lisa was typing on her computer, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "Commander, I'm finding some old records. There really was a ship called the USS Phantom. It was listed as missing in action in 2187. Jake felt a small spark of interest despite himself. "What else do the records say?" "Not much," Lisa replied, frowning at her screen. "Most of the files are classified or damaged, but there are some coordinates here. The last known position of the Phantom before it disappeared." "Where?" Jake asked. "The Void Nebula, about 6 light-years from here." Jake knew the Void Nebula. It was a dangerous place where sensors didn't work right and ships sometimes got lost forever. No one went there unless they had to. "This is crazy," Jake said. "We're talking about chasing a ghost story while the biggest alien fleet in history is heading for Earth." "Sometimes crazy is all we have left," Pete said quietly. Just then, alarms started ringing throughout the ship. A communications officer called out from across the bridge. "Commander, we're getting reports from the outer colonies. The Zephyrian advanced scouts have arrived. They're beginning orbital bombardment of New Tokyo." Jake felt his heart sink. New Tokyo was home to 12 million people. If the aliens were already attacking the outer colonies, they had even less time than they thought. How long before the main fleet arrives? He asked. 2 days, sir. Maybe less. Jake looked at the datapad again, then at Admiral Sullivan, then at Lisa Hayes. 2 days to find a miracle, or humanity would be extinct. Lisa, he said finally, prepare a full intelligence search on the USS Phantom. I want everything we can. Find about that ship, its crew, its mission, and its disappearance. Yes, sir, Lisa said, her fingers already flying over her keyboard. And prepare a scout ship, Jake continued. Small crew, fast engines, best sensors we have. Admiral Sullivan smiled. You're really going to do it. You're going to chase a ghost. I'm going to chase hope, Jake replied. It's the only thing we have left. Over the next few hours, Lisa worked without stopping. She dug through old databases, classified files, and historical records. Slowly, a picture began to form of the mysterious USS Phantom. The ship had been part of an experimental program during the early days of human space exploration. It was built with technology that was advanced even by current standards. The crew manifest showed 800 of humanity's best and brightest, led by Captain Nathan Cross. Look at this, Lisa said, showing Jake a faded photograph on her screen. Captain Cross was a legend. He won every major battle during the First Contact Wars. Some people said he could read the enemy's mind. The last mission report for the Phantom was strange. The ship had been ordered to investigate unusual energy readings in the Void Nebula. After that, nothing. No communications, no distress signals, no wreckage ever found. It's like they just vanished into thin air, Lisa said. Jake made his decision. Captain Rick Stone, he called to a young officer across the bridge. Yes, sir? I need you to take the scout ship Ranger and investigate these coordinates, Jake said, handing him the data pad. Take engineer Amy Parker and communications specialist Dan Turner with you. Find out what happened to the USS Phantom. Rick looked at the coordinates and his eyes widened. Sir, that's in the Void Nebula. Ships don't come back from there. This one has to, Jake said firmly. We're running out of time and we're running out of options. If there's even a chance that the Phantom is still out there, we need to find it. As Rick left to prepare his mission, Jake looked out at the stars. Again. Somewhere out there, a massive alien fleet was coming to destroy everything humanity had built. And somewhere else, maybe, was a ghost ship that might be their only hope. The next few hours would determine the fate of the human race. The Void Nebula was darker than space itself. Captain Rick Stone watched from the pilot seat of the scout ship Ranger as thick clouds of cosmic dust blocked out the stars. His instruments flickered and showed readings that made no sense. Compass. Needles spun wildly and the computer screens filled with static. This place gives me the creeps, said Amy Parker from the engineering station. She was a small woman with red hair and smart eyes, but even she looked nervous as she watched her equipment go crazy. Dan Turner sat at the communications console, adjusting dials and trying to get clear signals. I'm picking up weird sounds, he said. Like voices in the static, but they're not speaking any language I know. Rick had been flying ships for 15 years, but he had never been in a place like this. The nebula seemed alive somehow. The gas clouds moved in patterns that looked almost like breathing, and sometimes he could swear he saw shapes in the mist that looked like faces. How much further to those coordinates? Amy asked. Rick checked his navigation computer. About 2 hours if these readings are right, but I'm not sure anything works properly in here. They flew deeper into the nebula, following the last known position of the USS Phantom. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the strange whispers that Dan kept hearing in the radio static. Then Amy's sensor started beeping loudly. I'm getting something, she said, her voice excited. It's big, really big. About 10 kilometers ahead. Rick slowed the Ranger and peered into the cosmic fog. At first he saw nothing but swirling gas and dust. Then, slowly, something began to take shape in the darkness. It was a ship, but unlike any ship Rick had ever seen. The USS Phantom was massive, easily 3 times the size of the biggest human vessels. Its hull was dark gray, almost black, and covered with scars that looked like battle damage. But the strangest thing was how it seemed to fade in and out, like it wasn't completely there. "My God," Dan whispered, "it's real. The ghost ship is actually real." Rick brought the Ranger closer, his hand steady on the controls despite his racing heart. The Phantom drifted silently through the nebula, showing no signs of life. No lights in the windows, no energy readings, no communication signals. "Amy, what are your scanners telling you?" Rick asked. Amy stared at her instruments with confusion. "This doesn't make sense. The ship should be dead after 200 years, but I'm reading life support in some sections. And the power core, Rick, it's showing energy levels that are impossible." "Impossible how?" "The readings say it's producing more power than our entire fleet combined. But that can't be right." Rick moved the Ranger to the Phantom's docking bay. The huge doors were closed, but as they approached, the doors began to open by themselves. Red emergency lights flickered on inside the bay, casting long shadows. "Someone knows we're here," Dan said quietly. They docked the Ranger and put on their spacesuits. The air inside the Phantom's docking bay was breathable according to their sensors, but Rick didn't want to take any chances. They stepped through the airlock and into the ghost ship. The corridors of the Phantom were like nothing they had ever seen. They stretched much longer than should have been possible, and the walls seemed to shift and change when they weren't. Looking directly at them, emergency lights flickered on as they walked, lighting their path through the darkness. "This ship is bigger inside than outside," Amy said, checking a handheld scanner. "That's not physically possible." They walked through empty crew quarters where personal belongings were still scattered around, as if the crew had just stepped out for a moment. Pictures of families sat on desks, and coffee cups were still sitting on tables, though the coffee had long since turned to dust. "Where is everyone?" Dan asked. 800 people were on this ship. There should be bodies, or at least bones. But they found no sign of the crew anywhere. The ship was empty, yet it felt like they were being watched. Footsteps echoed in the corridors when no one was walking. Doors opened and closed by themselves. Sometimes they heard voices speaking just too quietly to understand. They reached the bridge after walking for what felt like hours. The command center was enormous, with computer screens and control panels covering every wall. At the center sat the captain's chair, empty but somehow waiting. Dan went to the communication station and started working with the ship's systems. "I'm getting something," he said after a few minutes. "The ship's computer is still active. It's trying to talk to me." The main screen at the front of the bridge flickered to life. Words appeared slowly as if typed by invisible hands. "Hello. I am Echo. I have been waiting." Rick stepped forward. "Waiting for what? For you to come, for the time to be right, for humanity to need us again." "Who are you?" Amy asked. "Where is the crew of this ship?" "We are the crew. We are still here. We never left." The lights on the bridge grew brighter, and suddenly the air felt different, warmer somehow and full of presence. Rick could feel that they were not alone, even though he could see no one else. "I don't understand," Rick said. "The crew died 200 years ago." "Died is not the right word. We became something else. Something more." Images began to appear on the screens around the bridge. Rick saw faces of men and women in old-style uniforms. They looked solid and real, but Rick knew they were seeing ghosts. One face appeared larger than the others. A man with kind eyes and gray hair wearing a captain's uniform. Words appeared under his image. "Captain Nathan Cross." "You're the captain of this ship," Rick said. "I was. Now I am part of the ship. We all are." "What happened here?" Amy asked. We're fighting the first alien war. Our ship was damaged badly. We were dying, but our chief scientist found a way to save us. She built a machine that could put our minds into the ship's computer before our bodies died." More faces appeared on the screens. Engineers, weapons officers, medical staff, all looking as real as living people. The process changed us. We became one with the ship. Our thoughts became its thoughts. Our knowledge became its memory. We have been watching the war between humans, And the Zephyrians. We have been learning. Learning what? Rick asked. How to win. How to save humanity. How to turn this ship into a weapon that can destroy the enemy fleet. Dan looked up from his console. Rick, I'm getting urgent messages from the Endeavor. The Zephyrian fleet has arrived early. They're attacking the outer colonies right now. Rick felt his heart sink. They were too late. While they were exploring the ghost ship, the enemy had begun their final attack. The time has come. Echo typed on the screen. We need living crew to help us. The ship can fight, but it needs human minds to guide it in battle. What are you asking us to do? Amy said. To join us, to become part of the ship as we did, to help us save your people. Rick looked at his two crew members. They had come looking for a legend and found something impossible. A ship crewed by the dead, asking them to give up their lives to save humanity. But outside the nebula, 10,000 enemy ships were destroying everything humans had built. And this ghost ship might be their only hope. What do we need to do? Rick asked. First, call your commander. Tell him we are coming. Tell him the Phantom has returned. Commander Jake Morrison stared at the communication screen in disbelief. Rick Stone's face looked back at him from the bridge of the ghost ship, but something was different about his eyes. They seemed older somehow, as if he had seen things that changed him forever. Say that again, Captain, Jake said slowly. I want to make sure I heard you right. The USS Phantom is real, Commander, Rick replied. And its crew is still alive in a way. They want to help us fight the Zephyrians, but they need living people to work with the ship's systems. Behind Rick, Jake could see strange lights moving across the walls of the alien bridge. Sometimes the lights looked almost like people, but when he tried to focus on them, they faded away. Lieutenant Lisa Hayes was working frantically at her station. Commander, the enemy fleet is 3 hours away from Earth. We've lost contact with 6 more colonies. The outer defense line is completely gone. Jake rubbed his face with both hands. Everything was falling apart, and now his scout team was talking about ghost ships and dead crews. But what choice did he have? The conventional fleet was hopeless. Against the Zephyrian armada. What exactly are they asking us to do? Jake asked. Rick's voice was quiet but steady. They want volunteers to come aboard the Phantom. The ship needs human minds to link with the ghost crew. It's the only way the ship can fight at full power. And what happens to the volunteers? I don't know, sir. But I think we become part of the ship like they did. Admiral Pete Sullivan stepped forward. Jake, every minute we wait, more people die. If there's even a chance this ghost ship can help us, we have to try. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was watching him with hope and fear in their eyes. They all knew they were going to die fighting the Zephyrian fleet. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way. How long would it take for the Phantom to reach Earth? Jake asked. The ship can move faster than anything I've ever seen, Rick replied. It doesn't seem to follow normal rules. We could be there in 2 hours. Jake made his decision. Rick, tell the Phantom we're coming, and tell them we're bringing volunteers. 30 minutes later, Jake was aboard a fast transport ship with 12 of his best officers. Lisa Hayes sat beside him, her face pale but determined. Across from them, weapons specialist Kate Brooks checked her equipment one more time. Pilot Sam Mitchell stared out the window at the stars, probably wondering if he would ever see them the same way again. Are we crazy? Kate asked quietly. Probably, Sam replied. But crazy might be our only chance. They reached the Phantom in record time. As their transport docked with the massive ghost ship, Jake felt a strange chill run down his spine. The ship felt alive somehow, like it was watching them. Rick Stone met them at the airlock. He looked the same as before, but Jake noticed that his movements were smoother, more precise, and his eyes definitely looked different. The ship is preparing for battle, Rick said as he led them through the corridors. The ghost crew is getting the weapons ready, but they need us to complete the connection. They walked through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. The walls pulsed with soft light, and Jake could hear whispers in the air, voices speaking just too quietly to understand. Sometimes he thought he saw people walking beside them, But when he turned to look, no one was there. The bridge of the Phantom was incredible. Computer screens covered every surface, showing information that Jake couldn't read. At the center of it all was the captain's chair, but now someone was sitting in it. Captain Nathan Cross looked exactly like the pictures in the old files, except that he was slightly transparent. He wore an ancient uniform, and his eyes held the wisdom of 2 centuries. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from the air itself. "Welcome aboard, Commander Morrison," Cross said. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "Captain Cross," Jake replied, not sure if he should salute a ghost. "Your ship is humanity's last hope." "Our ship," Cross corrected. "If you're willing to join us, it becomes your ship too." Lisa stepped forward. "What exactly happens when we join with the ship?" A woman's voice answered from the air. "You become more than human, but you remain yourself." A ghostly figure appeared next to the captain's chair. She was tall and elegant, with intelligent eyes and the uniform of a tactical officer. "I am Commander Elena Rodriguez," the ghost said. "I was the tactical officer of this ship. When you join with us, your mind links with ours. You keep your memories, your personality, your skills, but you also gain our knowledge and our connection to the ship." Sam Mitchell looked nervous. "Do we die?" "Your body becomes part of the ship," Elena explained. "But your mind becomes something greater. You will see battle in ways you never imagined. You will be able to think and react faster than any human. And you will be connected to all of us." Jake looked at his officers. They had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive. Now they were being asked to give up their human lives to become something else entirely. "How much time do we have?" Jake asked. "The Zephyrian fleet will reach Earth in 90 minutes, Captain Cross replied. "If we're going to help, we need to leave soon." Kate Brooks stepped forward first. "I'm in," she said simply. "If it saves humanity, I'm in." One by one, the others agreed. Lisa Hayes, Sam Mitchell, and the rest of Jake's team all volunteered to join with the ghost ship. Finally, only Jake remained. "Commander," Cross said gently, "the choice is yours. But the ship fights better when it has a living commander to work with." Jake thought about Earth, about the billions of people who would die if the Zephyrian fleet wasn't stopped. He thought about his crew, about the impossible choice they were all making. Then he sat down in a chair next to the captain's position. "What do I need to do?" he asked. The ship around them began to change. Cables emerged from the walls and connected to each of the volunteers. At first, Jake felt nothing. Then slowly, he began to sense something new. Other minds touching his thoughts. The ghostly crew of the Phantom, welcoming him into their family. Knowledge flowed into his brain. Battle tactics from 200 years of observation. Technical information about weapon systems that didn't exist in the normal world. Strategic thinking that was beyond human capability. But he was still himself. Still Jake Morrison. Still the commander who wanted to save his people. Only now he was also something more. Lisa gasped as the connection completed. "I can see everything," she whispered. "The whole ship, all the weapons, all the possibilities." Sam laughed with wonder. "I can feel the ship's engines like they're part of my body. This is incredible." Around them, the Phantom began to transform. Weapon systems that had been hidden for 2 centuries emerged from the hull. The ship's armor reconfigured itself into new patterns. Energy levels rose to impossible heights. "Welcome to the crew of the Phantom," Captain Cross said. "Now let's go save humanity." The ghost ship turned toward Earth, its living and dead crew united in purpose. In the distance, 10,000 enemy vessels waited to destroy everything humans had built. But now they would face something they had never encountered before. They would face the fury of the dead, guided by the will of the living, aboard a ship that existed between worlds. The Zephyrian armada stretched across space like a dark cloud. 10,000 warships moved in perfect formation toward Earth, their hulls gleaming with deadly purpose. War Marshal Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue planet grow larger on his screens. "Begin the final bombardment," he commanded. His voice was cold and final. "Today, we end the human plague forever." The massive alien fleet spread out around Earth like a net closing on trapped fish. Human defense stations fired desperately at the approaching enemy, but their weapons barely scratched the Zephyrian shields. The few remaining human ships tried to form a battle line, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Then something impossible happened. A ship appeared in the middle of the Zephyrian formation. It materialized out of nowhere, as if it had stepped through a doorway in space itself. The USS Phantom hung in the darkness like a messenger of death, its scarred hull gleaming with strange energy. "What is that?" Kethvar demanded. His officers scrambled at their stations trying to identify the mysterious vessel. On the bridge of the Phantom, Jake Morrison felt the ship's power flowing through his transformed mind. He was still himself, but now he was also part of something greater. The ghost crew surrounded him, their consciousness merged with his own. "All weapons ready," reported Kate Brooks. Her voice came from the ship's speakers, but Jake could also hear her thoughts directly in his mind. She had become one with the ship's weapon systems, and her knowledge of destruction was now superhuman. Lisa Hayes was connected to the ship's sensors and tactical computers. "I'm reading 10,000 enemy vessels," she said, "but I can see their weaknesses. The ship is showing me how to defeat them." Sam Mitchell laughed with joy as he felt the Phantom's engines respond to his thoughts. "This ship doesn't just fly," he said. "It dances." Captain Cross appeared beside Jake's chair, his ghostly form solid and real. "Are you ready, Commander? It's time to show these aliens what humans can do." Jake nodded. Through his connection to the ship, he could feel the power at his command. Weapons that could tear holes in space itself. Shields that existed in multiple dimensions. Speed that defied the laws of physics. "All human ships, this is Commander Morrison aboard the USS Phantom." Jake broadcast on all frequencies. "Pull back to minimum safe distance. We're going to show the enemy what fear looks like." The Phantom moved like liquid lightning through the Zephyrian fleet. Sam Mitchell guided the massive ship between enemy vessels with impossible grace, while the ghost crew whispered tactical advice directly into Jake's mind. The first Zephyrian ship to fire at them discovered that their target was no longer there. The Phantom had shifted slightly out of normal space, letting the enemy weapons pass harmlessly through empty air. Then the ghost ship reappeared right behind the alien vessel. Kate Brooks fired the main weapons. Energy beams that existed partially outside reality struck the Zephyrian warship. The alien shields, designed to stop normal weapons, offered no protection against attacks that came from another dimension. The enemy ship exploded in silent fire. "Impossible," War Marshal Kethvar whispered. "Focus all fire on that vessel. Destroy it now." 100 Zephyrian ships turned their weapons toward the Phantom. Energy beams and missiles filled the space where the ghost ship had been. But the Phantom was already somewhere else, appearing behind another group of enemy vessels. Jake felt the battle through every part of his enhanced consciousness. He could see the flow of combat like a chess master seeing 20 moves ahead. The ghost crew fed him information and possibilities, while his living mind made the final decisions. "Lisa, target their command ship," he ordered. "Already locked on," Lisa replied. Her connection to the ship's sensors let her see through the Zephyrian formation as if it were made of glass. "Their war marshal is trying to coordinate the fleet." From the center, the Phantom vanished and reappeared directly in front of Kethvar's flagship. The alien commander stared in shock at the ghost ship that had somehow crossed 5,000 kilometers in the blink of an eye. "Fire everything!" Kethvar screamed. His flagship's weapons unleashed enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But the Phantom simply wasn't there when the attack arrived. The ship had shifted into another dimension, letting the weapons pass through the space it had occupied. Then the ghost ship returned to normal space, its own weapons charging with impossible energy. Kate Brooks channeled the fury of 200 years of waiting. The Phantom's main cannon fired a beam of pure destruction that punched through the Zephyrian flagship's shields like they were made of paper. The alien vessel broke apart in a ball of expanding fire. War Marshal Kethvar died still trying to understand what had killed him. With their commander gone, the Zephyrian fleet began to fall apart. But the Phantom was just getting started. The ghost ship moved through the enemy formation like death itself, appearing and disappearing at will. Every time the aliens thought they had it targeted, the Phantom vanished. Every time they tried to coordinate an attack, the ghost ship struck from an impossible angle. Jake and his crew fought with the knowledge of the living and the patience of the dead. Sam Mitchell made the massive warship dance between enemy vessels like a fighter craft. Lisa Hayes identified targets with superhuman precision. Kate Brooks destroyed entire squadrons with weapons that the Zephyrians couldn't even detect until it was too late. The other human ships, inspired by the impossible sight of their legendary protector, rallied for their own attacks. They struck at the confused and demoralized aliens while the Phantom drew most of the enemy fire. But the ghost ship was doing more than just fighting. Every Zephyrian vessel it destroyed was somehow absorbed into its own systems. Jake could feel the alien knowledge flowing into the ship's consciousness, making them stronger with each victory. The ship is learning from them, Captain Cross explained. Every enemy we defeat teaches us more about how to defeat the others. The battle turned into a rout. Thousands of Zephyrian ships tried to flee, but the Phantom was everywhere at once. It appeared in front of retreating vessels, behind attack formations, inside defensive lines that should have been impossible to breach. Within 3 hours, the greatest alien fleet in history was reduced to scattered wreckage. The few surviving Zephyrian ships jumped into hyperspace and fled toward their homeworlds, carrying news of an impossible defeat. The ghost ship hung in space above Earth, its hull gleaming with strange light. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, feeling the satisfaction of the living and dead crew members who had saved humanity. "What happens now?" he asked Captain Cross. "Now we return to the void," the ghost captain replied. "We wait and watch. If humanity is ever threatened again, the Phantom will return." Jake looked at his transformed crew. They were no longer entirely human, but they were still themselves, and they had chosen to become guardians of their species, protectors who would sail forever between the worlds of the living and the dead. The USS Phantom faded from normal space, returning to the mysterious realm where legends live. But throughout human space, the story spread. The ghost ship had returned when all hope was lost. The dead had fought beside the living to save their people. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Phantom continued its eternal patrol, crewed by heroes who had chosen to become more than human, so that humanity itself could survive.